Happy fall, quilters! Today's video clip is going to be about the log cabin quilt. That's the quilt that's behind me, and you can configure this quilt in all kinds of different patterns as far as the block goes. So depending on the orientation of the block, you get different patterns on the overall design of your quilt. This video will cover where you can get your digital download. Although if you don't like the one that I'm using, you can always Google log cabin blocks that are paper pieced on the internet, and you can download your own preferred pattern. They all work just the same as far as paper piecing a log cabin block. The video will also cover the materials that you need, and it will cover how to carry out the project. Stick around to the very end. I'm going to go over a few possible layouts for this block. Let me hold it up here. This block is the log cabin block, and the long strips of fabric represent logs in a cabin. That's where it got its name. And in the center is supposed to represent light. So traditionally it'll be a yellow or red or an orange fabric in the center of the log cabin block. But of course, like anything else, you can make your own design decisions as far as what you would like in the center of your block. I've just went with a tradition design. By the end of this video, you should be able to confidently paper piece the log cabin block. So when I'm working, this is generally how I have things set up. I'll have the fabric strip sets that I'm working with off to one side. These are 2.5 inch, or I'm sorry, they're 2-inch strips. Normally strip sets come in 2.5 inches. So they're a little bit too small or in width for what I need, but they're perfect for this. And so I will have an ironing surface and an iron, and I will have my stack that I'm working on, something to cut with, and I've just got a little bitty straight edge ruler that I'm going to use for this project. I don't need anything bigger. And I'll have my sewing machine right beside it, and then extra light. I dropped in a list of things that you'll need for this project. The first thing that you'll need is a printable digital design. I've chosen these papers because they're easy to find on the internet. These can be found at quilterscache.com/MHOHN. You're hoping to get these perfectly pieced log cabin blocks. The way you go about this is paper piecing. So this is what the front of this will look like, and this is what the back side looks like. You have a paper backing to go on it. The backing will be both a stabilizer to your quilt block, and it will have all of the lines that you will follow as you're doing this. You'll want to print this actual size. Do not scale this image. And then after you print your first block, you just want to print one of them out, and you want to check your test square and make sure with your ruler that your test square comes out to, this one says 1-inch test square, so make sure that it comes out to 1 inch. After that, you begin with this process. So I will start with a ruler, and this one it's a super thin seam gauge. Get you something like this that's super thin. You might get a credit card, but that will only be big enough for like your first couple of folds. And you're going to want to go and you fold and crease every single fold across your entire paper. So everywhere that there is a line, you make a fold. There's a line here, you make a fold. When you get to this outside seam allowance, you leave the seam allowance alone. You don't have to fold that one, but all the others on every side you want to get in there. When you fold it over, I think you can see very well these. You'll have all of your fold lines, and these will become important when you start to pin. When you're looking at this, your natural inclination will be to pin it this way, and this is not the way you want to pin it. You are relying on the fold line, so you need to know where your number 1 and your number 2 is. You should be able to see them through your paper. And you lay this down. You'll lay your number 1 fabric so that it completely covers the square that's below it that you start with. And then you'll lay in your number 2 one. And these you want to lay right sides together, just making sure that they measure, or they come along and you have room for a seam allowance between your number 1 and your number 2 block. So check behind it and check your fold and make sure that you've got enough of a seam allowance. Take a pin and pin it, and the only reason that I use pins in this is just to keep the fabric from flopping over while you're sewing, because you're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew on this side. And like I said, you will sew right down this line, and what you want to do is start a little before and a little after on each side. These stitches, the stitches don't actually pop out, but they'll come out from the paper. So they will not matter, but you start a little bit before and a little bit after. That way, if you have any skip stitches or any do decide to pull out, you'll have room in your allowance there that you've started so that you won't have to re-sew it. If you're wanting to make a whole lot of the same blocks at once, it might be good that if you do each step, you pin all of your pieces together and then take them over to the machine. This actually, to me, seems to save a lot of time. It gets your mind working on exactly how you want everything to work. And so if you want to work on a stack at once, so that you will yield a stack all done and ready for you, then this is a way that you can get this done fairly quickly. Here's the piece that I'm working on. I'm going to flip it over like this to where your seam lines will sew, and this will be the side that you'll be doing all of your work on. You'll start working between the number 1 and the number 2 on this line. You'll have your needle you'll drop your needle a little bit back from where you want to begin, and you start sewing. And you go a little bit beyond your stitch line on the other side. I've taken my first set of stitches here, and you'll notice it's began a little bit before and a little bit after your first stitch line here. So this is between the 1 and the 2. When you turn it over, I'm afraid on this one you can't really see it, but what you're going to do next is you come back to your work surface, and you're going to open this up, and you're going to give it a finger press like this. Once you have it finger pressed, you can turn it over, and you're going to fold between your 2 and your 6 line. So this line here, you're going to fold on, and as you can see on mine, I don't have enough that I need to cut anything off right here. Normally you would trim right at a 1/4 inch, but this is within the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I don't want to take off anymore. I'll press this on my ironing surface. The next thing I'll do is I'll turn this back. And as I do, the extra stitches where it's overlapped a little bit will snap back. My next number is the number 3. And so I'm going to look along that crease line. And this I am going to trim up. Since I've started with purple, my next color is going to be purple also. I'm going to flip my paper foundation over, and I see the number 3. I'm going to come back with an approximate piece of paper that will fit on that. So I'm just slicing off a scrap, and I'll flip this back over, and I will pin this my purple piece just lines up with these other 2 pieces, and notice it gives enough. You see the fold line here and the other pieces of fabric overlap a little bit. So you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance there for your number 3 fabric. I'll take this back to the sewing machine now and sew it. So you'll notice also on this one, just as the last one, I begin a little bit and a little bit before and a little bit after
my seam line here. I used a gold thread, but it doesn't really show much against the black. But anyway, a little bit before, a little bit after you start your stitches. This is the number 3, so when I turn it over, my number 3 fabric is right here. I'll fold it up like this and give it a finger press, and then I'm going to give it a press with the iron. After I've pressed it with the iron, I'm going to bring it back over and then I'll trim it up. So if you look on your number 3 fabric, you'll see that your 3 is right here, your line between the 3 and the 7 is right here. So you're going to fold on that line, you're going to come over here, and I'm using 1/4 of an inch on my ruler, and I'm slicing that off. I'm also going to trim on the other side, on the 6 side. So same thing, the few pieces of seam that you have there are going to snap right out of the paper. So don't be worried about that. See, I don't have 1/4 of an inch here, but I'm going to slice it even with the other fabric. And when I get around to that side again, that will be okay. So my next fabric is number 4. I'm going to trim this one up also. See how you snap your seam right out of your paper. Give this a slice, just like the others, at 1/4 of an inch. And then you're going to flip this back over. So your number 4 piece is about this long, and you're going to switch your colors now and either go to a white or a cream. I'm going to measure in my white fabric right here and give myself just a little bit of overlap in case I need some overlap while I'm sewing. You could do these exactly, but this is a little bit easier just to not do it exactly. I know that sounds weird because quilting is all about exactness, but it's going to come out looking exact anyway. Then you flip it over and you can see your number 4 number through there. You want to line up your fabric with the other fabrics, and then you need to pin. When you fold, you can see that you've got your seam allowance there. Now I'll take this back over to the machine and I'll add another seam line. So I'll be sewing on this side and my seam line will go right here. So I have my seam just like the others, a little before and a little after, and I will flip it over and take out my pin. And when I've got my pin out, I'll finger press this up just like the others. And then I'm going to move over to my iron and give it a press for a second. And then I'm going to bring it back. So this is your number 4 fabric. You'll turn it over and you see the number 4 and the number 8 and the line in between. And this is where you want your crease line to be turned up. So you'll take it right there and give it a trim right on your 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you flip it over, it's going to start to look like this. Now, the next fabric that I'm going to do is my number 5 fabric, which is right here. And there should be some overhang from the stitches that I had taken before, and these will pop back from the paper easily. And I'm going to trim this up right at 1/4 of an inch so that I can line up my next piece of fabric on this. And I'm still going for either white or cream. So I'll go back to my fabric stack and I'll pull up another piece of fabric. I found a white piece and I'm laying it on here. It's going to have a little bit of overhang, but that's just fine. I'm going to line it up with the other fabrics and then I'm going to drop my pin in. Notice I keep my pin well down at the bottom away from the sewing field. So my stitches will go up here, I pin way away from it. I don't see any of this on the other side, so it's important that I keep the pin away because I'll be stitching on this side. So I'll come back over here between the 5, between the 1 and the 5, and that's where I'll take my stitches. Now that you have your number 5 sewn line, you're going to bring it over, and actually it looks very good. But you're going to have a little bit, my piece was a little bit long, so I'm going to bring it back over here between the 5 and the 6, and I'm going to pop back these stitches, and then I'm going to make a slice. This was a narrow seam allowance, so I actually have a little bit less than of a 1/4 of an inch, but I went ahead and made a slice at a 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to turn this piece up like this and give it a finger press. I took it over to the iron and gave it a stronger press for just a second, and then I'm going to turn this back between the 5 and the 9. I'm going to lay my seam gauge right here, or right along the 1/4 of an inch. Slice that off. Then we're going to move around to the number 6 position. I have a piece of, it's hard to tell, but this is the right side. So I'm going to lay my right side down and pin as always. Then I'm going to take it back over to the sewing machine and make another line of stitches. And these stitches will go right along the 6th one. With my number 6 stitches down, as you can see, a little bit before and a little bit after, just like all of them, then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to take my pin out and give it a finger press. And then take it over to my ironing board and press again. After I've pressed, I'm going to turn it over and trim off this edge between the 6 and the number 10 on this line. I'll lay it out to have my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there. And then I'm going to look at it and I'm going to choose my next fabric. I have a purple fabric here that will fit, and notice as always, I'm laying these right sides together and I will pin. As these get a little bit longer, it may be helpful to put 2 pins in because you don't want these edges flopping over underneath the sewing machine since you can't see that. Once I have the stitches right along the 7 line, I will flip it over to the other side where which is the side you don't see while you're sewing. And I'll turn this over and give it a finger press and then press it with my iron on the ironing board. After I've pressed it, I'll bring it back over to the other side and I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to find the line between the 7 and the 11. And I'll fold it back and I'll trim the excess off at a 1/4 of an inch. You'll notice you can start to see it's taking shape quite a bit now. So you have your number 7 and you're going to go to your number 8. So that's your next block. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to snap a couple of those stitches. I'm not really snapping the stitches, I'm just removing it from the paper so that the paper will fold. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to lay my next piece of fabric. I have a cream piece right here that I think would look nice. And sometimes your fabrics can look very close. So I'm going to flip this over right sides together. And I'll add my pin in, which I've lost. It blends in really well with my ironing board that I stuck it in. So I've got this pinned. I'm going to take it over to the machine now. So now I have my number 8 fabric has been sewn, and you can see right here and right here it begins a little bit before the line like all the others with the stitches. I'll flip it over to the other side, remove my pin, and press this up. Once I have it pressed with the iron, then I'm going to go back like all the others and turn it over. I'm going to be trimming my number 8 fabric between the 8 and the 12 along this line. So I'll fold my paper back along the fold line. I'll set up my ruler and trim. So I've got that one on, and I'm moving on to my number 9 fabric. My number 9 will be a white fabric or a cream. I'm going to lay this one in right sides together. This is one of those fabrics where it's a little bit thin and it prints straight through, so it looks very similar on both sides. So you put your pin in and take it back over to the machine and take the next set of stitches. So I have my number 9 stitches set in here for the number 9 fabric, a little bit before, a little bit after, and all the way down in between. You'll take it over, unpin it, and fold it flat like this. Give it a finger press, and then press it with your iron. Once you've pressed it with the iron, you're going to flip it over, and between the 9 and the 13, you'll fold and then trim this back. And you'll notice it's time to change colors back to purple again at this point. So with my number 10 fabric, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check it and make sure that it will fit in the area, and I'll measure it out here. Yes, it does. So this is my purple fabric I'll be using, and I will lay it in here right sides together and line it up so that it'll fit with the stitches. Then I'm going to pin it down. So I have my number 10 stitches in here, and they began a little bit before each on the line on the number between the 9 and the 10. I'm sorry, between the 6 and the 10. And you'll turn it over just like all the others. Finger press this up, and then take it to your ironing board and press. Once you've pressed, you'll turn it over to the other side, and you'll just lay this along the edge and take your slice to even up the edge. So you'll notice you've got your seam allowance left in here, and that's so you can join it to your next piece of fabric. Your number 11 fabric, I've got one measured out here that I know will fit in this area. So I will turn it over to the other side. My 11 is right here, and I'll line this one up so that it works right there. I'll put a pin in and take this one back over to the sewing machine. Now I have my 11 stitches here for the fabric 11. I'll turn this one over and bring it up, finger press it back just like all the others, and then take it over to the ironing board to press. Once I've pressed it, I'm going to turn it back over, and I'm going to take my slice off of the edge so that it's evened up. Then I'm going to flip it back over, and I'm going to start back with the white fabrics again. So since this purple overlaps and it'll show through the white more than normal, I'm going to go ahead and even this up on this side. I'm just going to snap that back. And at least make the purple less obvious. This is my number 12 fabric. I'm laying it down right sides together, just like all the others. It's a little short that way. There, make sure that it covers your area. This one just does. And then I'll take a pin and put the pin back in it and take it over to the sewing machine and make my stitch line. So I'm back from the machine and I have my stitch lines laid in here, and I'm going to flip this over to the other side and flip it up. Make your finger press and then take it over to the ironing board and press. Once you have it pressed, turn it over like this. Even up your edge. And you're down to your last color here. My last color is my number 13. I'm going to lay it along the fabrics that have already been trimmed. And place a pin. And then I'm going to take it back over to the sewing machine. Now you're down to your last little bit. So you'll take your pins out, fold it up, and give it a finger press, and then take it to the iron and press again. Now that you've got this, you just turn it over and got it pressed. Just take your last evening up around your block now. This makes it really, really, really fast. If you need to, square up your block, it's just smidgens around the edge. It's not like looking at it, making sure it's square. It already is square. So just tidy it up a little bit where it's had some overhang. Got a tiny bit of the paper, but really small smidge. This is your finished block, and to me this is just a perfect block. It will match all of your others just perfectly, and I would encourage anyone to try this block. It's very easy.
One of the things that I did differently is I did some different types of blocks that are all log cabins. Now that you've come to the end of this project, I want to encourage you to try some different layouts. So I ended up making 3 different types of blocks. These are the classic log cabin blocks with the split design where you've got one side very light and one side dark with the light in the middle. So this was the first part that I made, but in order to make some of the different variations on the layout, I picked some white ones. I also made a stack of dark ones just like the light ones. And the reason I did this was I used these for the center of one of the layouts. So all together, I made 4 light ones, 4 dark ones. And if you are doing this and you want a square quilt, I would go with 20 of these. I don't quite have 20 done. But that is the way that you might get a classic layout and get a square quilt. I've climbed to the top of my stairs and I've taken a few snapshots of different orientations for these quilt blocks. The first quilt block that you'll see here is a classic log cabin block, and it's just done repeatedly in the same orientation. This next one is, I believe the name of this is Courthouse Stairs. When all the blocks are turned toward the center, and this can be done repeatedly throughout the entire quilt. On this one you can see that I've changed the orientation kind of in an odd even pattern going down the block, and all that I've had to do with this is add some of the solid cornerstones
that are all one single color of the log cabin blocks that I'd made for this pattern. On this star block, you'll notice that the corners have the light cream colored solid blocks in them, and the center has the dark purple blocks in it. The classic log cabin blocks that we practice today go on the points of the star. I think this may be my final choice for the layout that I like the best on this block. We've covered a lot of ground in this video. We started with the whole process and overview, and you've hung tight right till the end to the layouts. The next thing for you to do would be to make about 20 of these, and that will give you enough that you can play with the designs. Like and subscribe to get more compulsive quilting videos.